This is the Content Strategy Insights podcast, episode number 182. The profession of content design is notoriously generous and helpful, but most of the resources for practitioners in the field are in English. To support the large and growing content community in Poland, Wojtek Aleksander wrote his book, UX Writing: The Power of Language in Digital Products, to address design issues unique to his country. In particular, the challenges of crafting inclusive content in a language whose grammar is strongly gendered.
Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 182 of the Content Strategy Insights podcast. I am really happy today to welcome to the show Wojtek Aleksander. Wojtek is a content designer and content strategist. He also does content strategy training and does a lot of stuff in the content world, including he's just written a new book called UX Writing: The Power of Language in Digital Products. Unfortunately, the book is only in Polish at this point, but we're hoping to see a translation one of these days. But welcome to the show, Wojtek. Tell the folks a little bit more about what you're doing these days.
Hello, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm talking to you from Poland, the north of Poland, from the shore of a cold Baltic Sea, the sea that is colder in summer than the Mediterranean in winter. As you said, like I'm a content strategist working in the industry for a long time. My career extends over 20 years. I've supported different domains and brands, domains like healthcare, banking, application performance management, which is like a server side software, and things, data analysis and things like that.
Nice. And yeah, because when we first met, we met at a UX writing conference like 3 or 4 years
Right.
ago, and you were working at that big Nordic bank chain
True.
at that time. That's how I remember. It always takes this long to get people on the podcast. But I'd love to learn more about your book. I feel a little ambivalent about it because only the Polish people get to read it at this point, but I'm really pulling for a translation soon. Tell us a little bit about the scope of that. And I love the way you phrase the subtitle, "The Power of Language in Digital Product." That seems like what we're all about.
Yeah. True. The power of language, that's how we want to see things, and that's how they work. So the book, it's in Polish because we needed that book in Poland. I learned over the years, kind of working with different people, kind of that language was a little bit of a barrier. Like all the seminal books on content strategy are in English. On UX writing, they are all in English, and content design, they're all in English. And all the materials kind of come from the English side speaking of the world, and there was a big hunger for some resources in Polish, especially that the language is specific and at times difficult, a little bit different than English. So the examples and also guidelines needed to be adjusted. And the book kind of walks you through the world of content design, like starting with the fundamentals like accessibility, inclusion, where there's kind of quite a substantial part of the book actually, and then going further into UX writing, life processes, and different content types that you have to deal with in the UI, ending with some leadership challenges and lookouts to the future of the profession.
I would love to, maybe, I wonder if, anyhow, I'm just already just thinking of like a machine translation to just get the gist of it. But anyhow, one of the things you just said, it occurs to me that like the book was needed. So there's a large enough number of content practitioners in Poland to justify a book. How do you have a feel for like how big is the UX world and the content design and the whole tech world in Poland?
I would say it's pretty large. And what's interesting is like we export our work most of the time. So people doing UX writing in Poland, they work for multinational companies. And like several years ago, when I tried to count people in Poland with the UX writing title, there were just a handful. Now, I'm not even starting because that number is pretty large. People with various degree of experience, so some of them over 5 years, and then mostly 3 to 5 years experience. So that discipline actually is booming because UX in general, I think it's also a thing in Poland, like as a discipline and a profession.
Yeah, and it's like it's a good sized country. It's almost what 40 million people or something like that. So
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's like not as big as France or Germany, but it's way bigger than the Netherlands where I live. So yeah. Well, one of the things you mentioned about the book, the scope was the focus on accessibility and inclusion. And we had a chat last week about some of the unique challenges, especially around inclusion, when you're working in the Polish language. Can you talk a little bit about like, well, I guess I'm wondering two things about that. One, just the particulars of that, like how you cope with that, but also like how much it came to dominate the book. Was it just a recurring theme that just came up over and over again?
Yeah, this is the absolute base of, I think, like any kind of human-centered writing, especially if you do that in a language like Polish, which is an inflected language, very that means like Latin Finnish. It has different grammatical cases where different words have different endings depending on the grammatical context. And what is also interesting or challenging in Polish is that it's a highly gendered language. We have three grammatical genders: masculine, feminine, and neuter. And up to some point, we used to believe that those genders in language, they are grammatical, purely grammatical. But now, as we learn more about world and we hear more people talking about themselves, their identity, how they see themselves, what language also does to them, we notice that like those genders are no longer grammatical, purely grammatical, that they are about almost semantic in this sense. Like, yeah, it's in some cases it might even be like a some sort of a manifesto, the grammatical form that you use. And the largest problem, or one of the largest problems with this, is that, and we experience that not only in Polish but in French, also Spanish, that the dominant gender, the default gender, whenever you wanted to generalize, talk about a larger number of people, you would use masculine forms, which of course has the whole baggage of like the patriarchal system, and consequences of that, removing a specific group here, groups of people from the conversation. So we kind of now work on inclusive language to give space to everyone, and have that equity in the language so that everyone is included and so that we don't exclude everyone. And yeah, and in Polish it's especially difficult because, like I said, like you can have like noun or your verb or even a numeral, they can have gendered endings. So if you wanted to say a sentence like "I was the first," I won the race because I was the first, so that part "I won" would already be like a specific gender, and then the first would also have a gendered ending. So if that was a woman saying that, she would use feminine endings, and a man would use masculine endings, and then someone non-binary will have a problem. So that's a deep problem because it's not only about pronouns. It's not only about the word endings themselves, like, because that would be the level of morphology. How do you build the words? And that's how it all started, actually, and also in other European countries like Germany and France, where people will try to just include two different endings at the end of the word, and that would kind of already signal like, yes, we're kind of inclusive, but
Yeah.
still two genders, binary point of view, and and some accessibility problems with those forms as well.
Oh,
So yeah.
yeah. That's it. It ripples out so quickly because when we talked last week, you talked about like, it was almost, you didn't say it this way, but to me, I was hearing like, yeah, you guys got it so good. You just have pronouns, you figure that out and you're good to go. And you're like, no, this is embedded throughout deep into the language. At a pragmatic level, like, so it's hard enough being a content designer. There's so much like, just getting the proverbial seat of the table and all that stuff. But getting to that point of once you've decided what you're going to say, that key juncture where you become a UX writer. What does the word crafting look like? Like how do you feel like, because I know we've networked in a lot of international events, so I know content designers around the world. Do you have a feel for like how much harder your job is?
uh, it's challenging. I don't know if I can kind of value how much harder it is, but that's true. Like, using those languages that they have genders, that they have inflected vocabulary. This is really different. Where kind of especially if you want to be inclusive, and sometimes it's about unlearning things. Like, we always, like in the case of plain language, for example, we say like, oh, I had to unlearn many things that they taught me at school, kind of using this flowery language. Now I am supposed to speak plain language. I have to unlearn things, and here is you need to unlearn many phrases. You have to also unlearn to build sentences in a specific structure, because you will end up in that in that word ending problems. So you have to, when you think, write, talk, or whatever you do with words, you have to think like, what is the subject, and before you say or write that, you have to already determine whether that the rest of the sentence will be gendered, for example. So that's an additional challenge, and it's really, really hard because we don't really have all the tools to do that, for various reasons.
Mhm. Yeah, and did you have to develop some of that, like in your practice just the I don't know, like that kind of grammatical and usage toolkit, like your own, I don't know, like style manual or something like that to guide people? Because I know you do training around. I don't know if you specifically include this in the trainings you do, but to the extent that you work with other people to help them do this, have you had to develop your own sort of tooling for that, or?
That's exactly what you need to do. And yeah, true. I also include that in my training, because it's kind of getting back to some of the uh, writing techniques that you might have forgotten, focusing mostly on, for example, plain language, the number of words, and the vocabulary. Um, and here you need to start thinking about exactly, like, yeah, that level of who talks to whom, and who is addressed, who is described. Do I need to say that? So there's yeah, you can have a list, and that's what actually we did, for example, for one of my latest healthcare projects, where we developed like a set of guidelines, which is like a toolkit, like use this grammatical form, use this as a subject, change the subject uh, and the verb, and then use the verb in this form, change the tense and stuff like that. So we developed that. That's sort of we had a quick workshop on which are all the available resources, which ones we want to use mostly for our product, so that it kind of fits the tone and voice, the tone of specific messages and the voice in general. So yeah, because some of the writing techniques might not be useful in specific domains, for example, right? Or if you write for localization, that's also something to consider. You wouldn't probably use like regional forms, which can help you sound, for example, impersonal, that is like neutral, but they won't translate well, or they will be a puzzle for people who localize it to a different market. Yeah, so it boils down to creating your own writing toolkit and then mastering it. Because there is also this challenge, like listing those tools and knowing that they exist is one thing, but then you have to practice, and that's what I talked about, like unlearning some specific kind of way of how you form sentences. This is something that you learn when you're like a toddler, right? How to form a sentence, and now you have to think how you form that sentence again.
Yeah, like you said a few minutes ago, you have to unlearn like the original way. But again, and you also use the analogy back then of like plain language that like, yeah, get over that fancy stuff you learned in college. You need to talk to regular people now. And it seems like it's analogous. But the other thing is you were just talking, I'm picturing like 4D chess or something because you always have like a grid of like the voice of the brand and then the tone in this particular situation. And then you have this additional axis of like who's talking to whom, and it sounds like there's other things in there, but that's really, but basically, like you said, it's a matter of whatever those dimensions are and considerations, you document them for yourself, and then you just practice, practice, practice.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like that multi-dimensional chess analogy because it's something like that. Yeah, it's this additional access and then also some strategy behind that, also like how you want to move.
Yeah,
True.
I had Jenny Scribani on a while back talking about messaging frameworks, and she has I think I was kind of picturing her grid because she has this kind of not 4D but like a complex grid for messaging architecture
Mhm.
documentation and how to implement it. Sounds very much in that tool, but I guess that kind of gets at the point, and that's why I wanted to talk. Even though we're talking specifically about the Polish language, the lessons you've learned and how to incorporate it into your practice, that seems totally like anybody could do that with any challenge they're facing, that kind of process you just set out. So thanks for that. I think that's pretty very useful. Hey, one thing it occurred to me as we were talking too, that like this focus on inclusion presumes that there's buy-in from the design leaders and product leaders
Mm.
and other folks that you're working with, that inclusion is good and in a goal of the company. Is that true? Is that, or do you have to advocate for that?
Uh, that's a difficult question in the sense that organically, like I think I've never met a person on a content team who would not want to go with the inclusive language. And then I also have to advocate for that too much. Although now I remember one of the companies where it was really a problem, for example, to have a gender selection box have more than 2 entries. So yes, in some cases, this might be a difficult challenge. I don't have good advice how to deal with it because, like, if there's such a strong opposition, it's maybe has to be boiled down to money, because actually, and that's also something like what I talk about in the book. Like, we already have a group of people in the market who were who and started to live in this world already with the values of inclusion, equity, diversity in place, and they don't know the world that could exclude you a lot. or they already can name different biases, and they are now start entering the market, and they start to spend money, and yeah, you need to talk their language anyway.
Yeah, is it
So
largely a generational thing in that sense? Because I think you're right that like the generation coming up behind us is way more inclusive. It just seems to me, and across many cultures that I'm familiar with, that it seems like it's. I mean, I think any human-centered designer is concerned with inclusion, I think, but it seems like you said, there's both the fact that it's sort of a matter of fact assumption of one generation, but there might be a generation ahead of them who are designing these experiences for whom it's less natural. Is that a challenge or?
I don't know. Like, I mean, mm, the perceptions that we talked about, yes, that I'm convinced that they exist, and that there are different kind of mindsets already around diversity and inclusion. But I think being inclusive is not does not. I wouldn't link that with generations. I think, yeah, like I come from a generation that you could assume has nothing to do with inclusion, but I'm kind of talking about it now, and many of our colleagues as well. And you can, I think it's all a matter of maybe your personal also experiences and stuff like that, where you kind of get quicker on that train. And yeah.
Yeah, you reminded me of something we talked about last week, that it's about a mindset shift, that it's not like a particular skill or anything, and everybody comes to it from a different way and comes more naturally to some people have to work at it. So it's just like any kind of competency, I think, is it's probably like in that way. Does that make sense? Is that-
Yeah, we can look at it as a competence for sure, and you can learn it. Of course, it's much more than that, because it's kind of something that you need to have in your heart. And I believe, like, kind of, suppose it's super hard to be two-faced in this sense, not inclusive in your private life and then inclusive when you do your business writing, for example, like or application writing or UX writing. You yeah, because that would be hard.
Yeah, no, the way you just said that too, it reminds me, I think the core competency that all of us really need nowadays, especially with AI and everything else going on, is that notion of human authenticity. And like you just said, you have to have it in your heart, and people will feel it if you don't, I think.
True,
Yeah. Hey,
true,
another
true.
thing, kind of back to kind of related to the buy-in question, there's also like another kind of adjacent thing in our world now is like the just the whole not buy-in, but like the business rationale for our work. I think in some quarters there's two issues there. I think there's one in some places there's just like that some people would say that not enough content designers are concerned with thinking about business impact. And I think a lot of them do, maybe some of them less, but maybe more concerned with the design side of things. There's that, but then there's just also not the disconnect, but like the fact that executives and high-level leaders in companies think about things in different ways than we do as designers. Can you talk about how, like, kind of some of your thoughts around how you show the impact, to those folks who are just all revenue and income based and lifetime customer value and all that stuff. Have you had success kind of attaching content activities to their goals and needs?
Yeah. You need, like, speak the language of your customer, right? That's the premise, and I think it's super hard for many of us in content design discipline, because I think, like, when you mention people kind of focus on company money, let's say, they are less concerned about metrics that we usually look at, that is kind of experience metrics, right? Because this is what we love, and that's what we always strive to affect, the experience metrics. But then somehow Yeah, that's true that people who kind of look at spreadsheets and all the numbers, they may feel that disconnect between the experience metric and their business metrics, recurring revenue, customer lifetime value, or yeah, churn and stuff like that, or new customer acquisition cost and stuff like that. So, and I think those are the things that we as content designers or as like the whole discipline, everyone, especially in more senior positions or leadership position, we need to kind of switch quickly to looking at that and being able to prove that we not only affect the experience metrics, which is hard in some cases, but then how does the content do that, right? What happens thanks to our work that we are now keeping people longer, or that it's cheaper to acquire new customers, which is already expensive, right? And then and things like that. And what I kind of also started kind of doing some time ago is to try to somehow build this model. I don't know how to call it, like approach where you would first prepare the product to give you the container, the layer for the proper content to work. So something like this usually requires some sort of design work, because it might be how the look like new screen or redoing a screen or adding something to a screen or a page. And then you need to develop that. But then thinking ahead and then like, okay, there will be some content that is supposed to do some good for the business. So how am I going to now make use of that container that they created for me to experiment with my variants of content to be able to say, hey, we started with before we started the numbers were like this. That was our baseline, and then we launched, we saw a little bit kind of the effect of that, and now we're kind of trying to affect the numbers even better. And then that thinking where you have those first harder to implement features, and then you have your space for your experimentation with content only, which is does not require coding, does not require design. Then you are able to somehow support yourself from the other results, because that there's just one let's say factor that is changing is the content. Of course, that's not possible in many contexts where kind of the application is a little bit more solid and stable, but there are some contexts where you can do that and try to think in this way. How do I build that infrastructure for ourselves, for the content team, to prove the value of content? Something like that, something that we didn't do. And also those business metrics are maybe not our favorite, because they also require some sort of writing that is not maybe everybody's favorite. It's kind of more business oriented rather than user oriented in some cases. But yeah.
As you're talking about that, it's kind of the holy grail for me. I think it seems like there's an opportunity looming with the arrival of decoupled architectures, and where you can craft content to an intent and a purpose independent of its presentation, and somehow measure that. And if you could then tie that to OKRs or something, then you're in the C-suite going, see, I told you, I need a big raise now. That's my dream anyway. Hey, Wojtek, I can't believe it. We're coming up close to time already. But before we wrap up, is there anything anything you want to share with the folks before we close?
Yeah, thanks. I think plugging into what we have just said about affecting the business understanding of the value of content, I think what my message to my colleagues would be, find a ways to really prove that it's not only the UX, but like the content within that work that was designed affects the world, the results. And why? Because it's kind of now it's really hard to keep your job with all sorts of mass layoffs. And sadly, we saw many content people let go first. But then now in the world of like design systems, patterns, design languages, and then good content and opportunities to design with content first. We have a chance to be part of UX and sort of kind of detach ourselves in thinking about the value that we really deliver to the business, not only to the user. This is super important, the value for the users, because that's how many things keep rolling. But then those people who look at the spreadsheets, they need to see us there in those spreadsheets. And it's a challenge for us to figure out the ways to secure our position.
That sounds like another mindset shift that we need to do, just like get inside that business person's head just a little bit more and adopt their mindset and think about how we're helping them.
Yeah.
Nice. Hey, one very last thing, Wojtek. What if folks want to connect online or follow you, what's the best way to find you online?
Sure thing. The easiest is to find me on LinkedIn. I'm super active there, reply to messages, specifically if you write why you want to contact me. So for sure, LinkedIn is the best place.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Wojtek. I always enjoy talking with you, and this was a fun conversation.
Awesome conversation. Great questions. I'm super happy that we had a chance to do that again.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.